This is your friendly neighborhood author, Jonathan, and you are listening to Season 5 of the Floor Rejects podcast, The Isle of Artemisia. Hi friends, and welcome back to another episode of Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? And by that I mean, where in my house am I recording this time? It's your friendly neighborhood author here. I've got a new chapter of the Isle of Artemisia for you, but if you missed last week, we followed Barrett as he woke up on a strange, seemingly deserted isle at first, but he soon realized that he was not alone, and we meet a new character, Anaxos, who appears to be the person who pulled him into the water during the shipwreck. And we also learn that Anaxos is one of the others, those people who showed up and took all of Barrett's friends. So that's kind of where we leave off, Barrett demanding answers, trying to figure out what's going on, and this is where we'll pick up with our new chapter. Chapter 8, Answers. First and foremost then, I need to know where my friends are, Barrett says, and Anaxos shakes his head. They are in the forest part of the island. I would have to take you there. Otherwise you wander in circles if you don't know where you're going, Anaxos explains, gesturing at the edge of the woods. You're gonna have to take me there, Barrett insists, and Anaxos puts a hand out, a signal to pause. I will get your friends back. You would not make it, Anaxos says. His tone is serious, and Barrett begins to grow nervous for his friends. Although he never really thought they were dead, now he got the idea that they were as good as lost wherever they were on this island. That was the impression that Anaxos gave, at least. Okay. Are you one of them? The people who took my friends? Barrett asks. This gives Anaxos pause, and he waits a while before tilting his head and answering. Yes and no. I am stuck here like the rest of them, but I do not do what they do. I stay here on my beach while they go out to catch, he says, and Barrett looks at him suspiciously. He had a question he was pretty sure he already had the answer to. Catch what? He asks. People, Anaxos answers immediately. Why? Barrett squeaks, and Anaxos sighs. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, he says, scrubbing his face and staring intently at the fire. What do you mean? Barrett asks. It is unbelievable, Anaxos says. Well, I'm here on an island. I've gone through abductions, glowing-eyed people, and a shipwreck. Try me, Barrett persists. Anaxos takes a deep breath. They want your friends as a gift, he says. A gift? For what? Barrett asks. A gift to the island, he furthers. A gift to the island? What do you mean? There's another pregnant pause as Anaxos seems to gather his thoughts. This island, it has plant that grows at its peak. He stops to point at the tip of the section of the island that juts over the beach, barely visible in the moonlight. Then he continues. The plant is very special to them, the people who live here. But according to them, the plant only lives when there is new blood on the island. So they have to go out and get new blood, he says matter-of-factly, as if it made all the sense in the world. Barrett begins to shake his head. No. You're telling me that my friends and I were abducted so that we could be sacrifices for some crazy island-dwelling cult? No, he says, and he stands pacing around the fire pit. Anaxos looks at him confused. Sacrifices? He says, modeling the word as he pronounces it, his accent thicker over the word than the others he had spoken. Sacrifice. You say gift, but you mean they're going to kill my friends for this island? Barrett says, not thinking of a clearer way to define the word. They will not kill them. Your friends will be made into one of them, Anaxos clarifies. Great. So these people want my friends to turn into glowing-eyed freaks, he yells, and Anaxos stands as if to come towards him, but Barrett holds out his hands, promising to keep his voice down. They want fresh blood. This is how they do it, Anaxos says. Out in the distance, the water rocks and splashes up on itself, the sound no longer relaxing or calming, but dark and eerie. So how do I get them back? Barrett asks, and Anaxos shakes his head. You don't. Once they are taken, it's fast, he says, a sad look in his eye. What? What is it? Barrett asks. Again, Anaxos shakes his head. I'm going to get them back. Barrett is insistent, and the man seems to be growing tense. No. I will try, but you are not allowed in the woods. They will get you there, he says. Barrett huffs. So what is it about this plant that demands a sacrifice, gift? Barrett asks. It has special things about it. The people here eat it, and they do not grow old. They can swim without air, and they never get sick, he says, and Barrett scoffs. Yeah, right. Next you'll tell me this magic plant can wake the dead, he says incredulously, but when he looks to Anaxos to confirm that idea was ridiculous, the man only shrugs. It has been said, he claims. Barrett sits down at the fire, and when he looks across at Anaxos, the man's eyes are glowing. He falls back off of his seat and scrambles away in fear. Anaxos shuts his eyes quickly, looking in Barrett's general direction. They have found someone, he says, keeping his eyes shut. Barrett stops moving away, sitting just out of the glow of the fire. Why do your eyes glow if you aren't one of them? He asks. Anaxos says nothing for a moment, then speaks in a tired voice. We are all connected by the plant. I eat enough to stay alive. I do not eat too much like the others, he explains. Enough to stay alive? How long have you been here? Barrett's voice is quivering. Since my boat was struck by them, long time ago. He doesn't expound on it at first, but Barrett sits and waits for him to further the explanation. I was in a war, the war for Greece to be its own. I was on a boat on the way to Navarino when our ship was struck by a storm. The storm was strong, and our ship was lost. I went overboard, and I remember nothing until I woke up here, with them. They kept us in the ground, in small holes until they brought each of us up one by one to eat the plant. I watched my brothers eat the plant and become one with the others, but when it was my turn, it did not work on me. I was not like them. I ran away that night. I found this beach and I stayed, Anaxos says, his deep voice wavering when he spoke of his brothers. You mean the war for Greek independence? You're telling me you've been here since what, the 1820s? Barrett asks incredulously. Anaxos laughs bitterly and nods. That is what they call it in your history books? Yes, for independence, I guess. He struggles with the word independence. Barrett creeps back towards the fire, unable to process what he has heard. So you are over 200 years old. That's what you're telling me. How can I believe that? It goes against all modern science, Barrett says, and Anaxos opens his eyes. The glowing ovals focus right on Barrett, who shrinks away. I'll show you, the large man says, standing and going into the hut for a moment before returning to Barrett with a handful of brush. Is that it? Barrett asks, daring to draw closer to Anaxos. The man nods, holding his hand out. The plant was pale and shaped almost like a delicate fern, with small leaves stretching out over larger fronds. It was almost white, icy looking in the fire's light. Before Barrett realizes it, Anaxos has drawn his knife, holding it out over his arm. What are you doing? Stop! Barrett yelps as Anaxos draws the blade down his forearm, blood welling and following the tip of the blade through his tanned skin. Then he shows the wound to Barrett, as if to prove there are no tricks, before rubbing the plant up and down his arm, scrubbing at the cut for a minute. Then he pulls the plant away and wipes the blood from his skin. There was no cut, no sign of the path of the blade, just smooth, unmarred skin. Barrett looks up at Anaxos, whose eyes were now dark, focused on the man in front of him. Your eyes, they're normal, Barrett says, reaching out to touch the place that the blade had drawn blood. They're coming back. They couldn't get him, he says, and he pulls his arm back, sitting down from the fire. You really are telling me the truth? Barrett's dumbfounded. Anaxos nods, and Barrett makes a nervous sound. So you've been here since the 19th century. Why haven't you tried to leave? He asks, and in the distance he can see glowing orbs begin to blink back into existence in the sea. I used to try. I used to swim out, but they would pull me back. They can sense when I try to leave. Eventually I stopped trying. They don't want me to leave. They're scared. Anaxos says, and Barrett's face contorts in confusion. They don't want so many to come, only who they choose, Anaxos says. Why us? Barrett asks, but Anaxos shrugs. I do not know. They choose amongst themselves. I am not with them, so I do not know, he says, and Barrett can understand that. He sees all the orbs now in unison floating back towards the shore. So then, we can't get away? They will track us? Barrett asks. Anaxos shakes his head. Not if I can get them away before they eat the plant, he says, and Barrett nods. So how long until they feed them? He asks. Anaxos rolls his neck, obviously not used to talking so much. Not long. A few days. Once they are hungry and very tired, the others will bring them out, he explains, and Barrett nods. The eyes were getting back onto the beach, far away from them. Anaxos doesn't seem too concerned, and his eyes flash green briefly. They will leave us alone. They think you are dead, he says. Are they telling you that through the plant? Why don't your eyes stay green like theirs? Barrett asks in a low voice as the others march back into the forest, as if in a trance. Anaxos nods. It links us all, he says. Once you have had the plant, you are always linked. I have learned to control my eyes over the years. I now only use the plant if I have to learn what they are doing, and to stay alive. Then he stands. It's time to sleep. Stay quiet, and stay inside until day, he instructs, before shuffling off to the edge of the woods. Barrett obeys, walking into the hut and lying on the makeshift bed. A few moments later, Anaxos comes in, carrying another bed, what he had been making earlier in the day. He sets it on the opposite side of the hut, next to the door. He settles in, groaning. Barrett has a thought, an idea, as the weight of the day shifts over him and sleep draws his eyelids closed. Why me, Anaxos? Why did you save me? He asks. He can hear the man sigh heavily. You are like me. You can fight the plant. I can tell, he mutters. And Barrett hums nervously. How could the man be sure? What was the reason to save him? He was still nervous, but he couldn't put all those feelings and thoughts together before his mind shuts down and he's asleep. When he wakes, sunlight is streaming through the cracks around the hut, and he's alone once again. The little bed across from him is empty, and so he ventures out to the beach. He finds Anaxos sitting out in the water, a stick in his hand with a string attached. Barrett rolls up his pants and wades into the water, standing behind Anaxos. Breakfast, the man says quietly, barely audible over the sound of the water rushing around them. Can I help? Barrett asks, but Anaxos shakes his head. I will be on the beach soon. Try to light the fire, the man instructs, and Barrett nods, struggling back up to the fire circle. He creates a little cone of twigs and branches, and next to the pit he finds 2 black rocks that he had seen Anaxos strike together to start the fire the night before. He clicks them together, trying and failing to get so much as a single spark to come from between the rocks. He hears a small laugh from behind him, and then a shadow comes over from him. Let me, Anaxos says, and Barrett holds the rocks up over his head. They're taken from him, and within seconds, sparks are flying into the pile of wood. Anaxos laughs again as the fire catches, and Barrett huffs in frustration. I will cook the fish, then I will go look for your friends, the man says, and Barrett nods. He was frustrated that he couldn't go with the man, but there was no way to get around it. If Anaxos said he couldn't go, he would stay. He didn't want to get lost. He didn't want to get captured. He hoped that Anaxos would find them quickly, that there was a way out of this nightmare he was forced into. The fire crackles, and the fish cook within a few minutes. Barrett tears into his with a ferocity, and Anaxos chuckles to himself as he watches. Barrett wonders what the man had done with all this time alone. He must be bored out of his mind, all by himself, but Barrett doesn't ask. He wasn't sure he should. He was curious about the man, but he didn't give up much in the way of information without Barrett asking, and so it seemed better to keep to himself. He felt that he would endanger his chances of seeing his friends if he kept prying. I'll go now. Stay hidden until I get back, Anaxos says, and without another word he grabs his knife from the sand where he had set it, stands, and goes to the edge of the forest, giving Barrett one last look before disappearing. Barrett goes into the hut, and his first thought is to go through the only thing besides the bed. He waits for a few minutes, and when he's sure Anaxos is gone, he goes to the chest and opens it. The chest is full of small things, things that Barrett was sure had washed up over the years. There were little glass bottles with corks, some brown, some green, and some clear. He digs and finds a rough-hewn shirt. Then deeper in the chest he finds another knife and a broken pair of binoculars. Just when he thinks he's found it all, he pulls a piece of paper out from the very bottom of the chest, hidden under a loose flap of lining. It was delicate and looked to be moments away from crumbling to dust. Barrett opens it carefully, unfolding what he figures out as a small note and pulling it up to a crack in the hut so he can read it. It was written in a clean, cursive font, and Barrett takes a moment to adjust before reading. A. Being with you has been the most thrilling, fantastic time in my life. I've never felt the way I feel about you with anyone else. You're beautiful, my love, and I wish to be with you forever. If you feel the same as me, meet me at our place tonight, and I will know that you find us together perfect. I love you, my dearest, and I hope to see you this evening. Love, E. Barrett reads this to himself and wonders who E was, but he doesn't dwell on it as he shuts the letter back into its place in the bottom of the chest, reshuffling everything so that the man wouldn't know anything was amiss when he got back. Barrett quickly shuts the chest and settles in on his bed, wondering how long he would be stuck in the hut, but he hears shuffling at the edge of the forest. At first he assumes it's Anaxos, but then he hears deeper, gravelly voices speaking in a foreign language outside. He freezes, his blood running cold. He tries to think of a place to hide, but there was no place. At first, he thinks this was a moment that he would be found out, but as the voices seem to stay still, not growing louder or closer, carefully he crawls over to the chest and pulls it silently through the sand, butting the back of it up against the side of his bed. Then he hears the voices begin to grow louder, closer to the hut. He crawls under the bed. He pulls his knees tight to his chest, praying that the dim lighting would save him. He closes his eyes as he sees a sliver of light hit the sand floor of the hut as the cloth is pulled aside. He can hear the feet shuffling through the sand for a few moments, but mercifully quickly the voices leave the hut, and Barrett heaves a sigh of relief. He stays under the bed for a long time, his face pressed into his shirt, breathing in the salty, earthy smell of the sand, and just as he decides it's safe to come out, again he hears shuffling coming from outside the hut. He stops again, keeping his eyes open as he watches the cloth move from the entrance. He sees the feet enter, and they walk straight at him. He prays that he will be spared, but as his eyes snap open and the chest begins to move away from him, he feels it, hands on his shoulders. In a split second, he decides to fight, reaching out before he can even register the person in front of him and begins to scratch and claw. Barrett, Barrett, stop, Anaxos hisses, and Barrett stops just long enough to recognize him, peering out from under the edge of the bed. I'm sorry. They were here. They came in here and I hid. I'm sorry, Anaxos, Barrett says, climbing out from under the bed. He can see red lines across the man's bare chest, and immediately he feels guilty. I'm so sorry, Barrett breathes, reaching out and touching one of the claw marks. Anaxos shies away. It's okay. It was smart to hide. I think they thought you were here, he says. And now? Barrett asks. Anaxos pauses, looking distantly at the ground. His eyes pulse green. Now they are sure you are dead, he says, and Barrett lets out a huge sigh before perking up. My friends, did you find them? Are they here? He asks, springing up, ready to run out and be reunited. Anaxos grabs him by the forearm, standing up. Barrett notices for the first time how the man towers over him. They are alive. I count 3 of them, but they are stuck. I must go at night to get them, he says, and Barrett groans. Can you go tonight? He asks, and Anaxos shakes his head. I cannot go when they are there. I must wait until they leave again, he says, and Barrett has to contain his frustration. He just wanted them back. He wanted to know they were okay and to get the hell off this island. Fine, but I am going with you, Barrett says. Anaxos now groans, obviously not willing to rehash the argument. You can try. You will get caught, he warns. I don't care. They need me, Barrett says, and with that, Anaxos leaves the hut, letting Barrett alone with his ideations of grandeur, of sweeping in and saving his friends. He knows it won't be easy, but he knows that Daniel would do it for him, and that Crystal wouldn't hesitate if she had the chance. Nick, well, he was a human in need, and Barrett reasoned that he would do everything he could to make their little unit whole again before they hatched up a plan to get home. So what do I like about this chapter? I kind of like the way that I wrote Anaxos' dialogue, and here's why I'll say that. Because I don't want to come off as offensive. I don't want to come off as someone who's trying too hard to write somebody with an accent or write somebody whose grasp on a certain language is not 100% perfect. Not that any of our grasps on the English language is perfect. But I wanted to get his points across without it being too icky, if that makes sense. I've listened to some audiobooks where the author tries really hard to write with the voice of the character, but it comes off kind of yicky and offensive and kind of like, oh, you don't know the language very well type of thing. And I didn't want that. That was not something I wanted when I thought of Anaxos. He's obviously smart enough to know another language, so why would I give him like weird choppy dialogue? It's still pretty simple. It's not, super complex sentences. It's not a lot of adverbs and prepositions and this and that and the third. It's pretty basic dialogue, but he gets his point across. He gets it across well. He does struggle with the word sacrifices and independence, but I tried to pick words that were maybe a little less common, that would not be the first words you would learn when learning another language. And I thought sacrifices was a good one. I thought independence was another one. He probably knew what independence meant, but he struggled to say it. So I do like the way that I wrote Anaxos' dialogue. I kind of like the imagery of his eyes glowing green whenever he's trying to communicate with the others, when he's trying to learn something about the others. I think that's fun. I think it's kind of scary, it's spooky, it reminds Barrett of the others, and kind of makes Anaxos a less trustworthy figure than he would be if his eyes didn't glow. It just gives this air of, can I really trust him or not, type of thing. So I like that. What else do I like about this chapter? I like the little note. I think that gives him a bit of backstory that Barrett didn't ask, because Barrett, if you will notice, doesn't really ask a lot of questions about Anaxos other than brief, direct questions about his background. He doesn't ask him about himself. He's just really concerned with understanding where he is to the point that it helps him get off the island. And so I like that we get a little bit of, we assume it's Anaxos' backstory because the letter is in the chest in his hut. And so I like that. I like that we have a little bit of that to go along with, this is his generic backstory that's set up so that we can further the story along. I also like that there's not like any immediate, like, I don't want to say attraction, but there's no immediate like, oh, this person's going to be my friend. Oh, this person is going to be someone I really like. It's just kind of he's a means to an end for Barrett right now. And I like that because it kind of helps us to not constantly feel like we're in the middle of a romance novel. Because when you read like a romance novel, most of the time there's like an immediate animal attraction between the two characters. And that's great for a romance novel, but I am trying to branch out and not be quite so heavy-handed, and I've been pretty heavy-handed in the past, so I want to try and stretch out this thing, because I think you can tell we're following Barrett. He's a main character. Most likely Anaxos is going to end up being an interest or someone interesting in the story, but they don't have to like each other right away. They don't have to even tolerate each other right away. I think it says a lot about Anaxos' character that he pulled Barrett out of the storm. I think it says a lot about him that he didn't let him die out there and that he's willing to help him at all. And so I think that a lot of Anaxos' character is spoken for without having to be directly addressed, if that makes sense. I apologize if you can hear that outside my window. It's the 13th year of the cicadas, and they are loud. Can you hear that? Listen. It kind of adds to the story, though, that like forest island, scary sort of feeling. So hopefully I can just leave those sounds in there. Some other things that I do like about this chapter. I like that there's not a big focus on Barrett hiding from the people who come into the hut. He just hides, they come, they leave. It's easy, it's not difficult, it's not stretched out like I have in the past stretched out points of a story like that, because it's not necessary. This chapter is all really about getting a basic foundation for why Barrett is on this island. And so I do feel like this is a good basis for what we have to deal with next, which is developing relationships between the characters, which is developing relationships with the island, with the people that live there, and developing a sense of fear for our characters. So I think we've got a good basis for that, for the chapters to come. Something that I do think I would like to do better is the ending of this chapter. I think needs some work. I don't think it's perfect. Like I've said before, these are rough drafts. This is not a finished product that I'm presenting to you. It's a rough draft that I read, and I kind of ask you for feedback or ask you to let me know what you like or don't like. I don't personally love the ending of this chapter, but I can't write 10,000 word chapters every episode, every week. It's just not possible. And that's why these are rough drafts, because I can get the ideas out and then later on I can go back and finish them up and have a more polished story, but at least I get the ideas onto the page. So I do think that the ending of the chapter is kind of like, well, but then again, every chapter doesn't need to have some like high-powered ending. Some chapters can just end with, this is the end of the chapter, and the next one picks up right where this one left off. I do like that Anaxos as a character doesn't immediately rush off to save Barrett's friends. I think it gives a good kind of middle ground for them to get to know each other a little bit better, so that Anaxos can become a full-fledged character and Barrett himself can kind of let himself be known a little bit more to the reader or the listener or whatever, however you consume the media. And I do like that as I was writing it, there was a little more of Barrett's voice, Barrett's reasoning, Barrett's thoughts within the narration of the story. That's something I kind of struggle with, is working the voice of a character who is the main character into the narration and not just strictly being a third-person omniscient narrator. Not even omniscient, because I don't really write to know the thoughts of every character all the time. It's mostly just following the main character through their journey, and then subsequently we learn what the other's intentions or thoughts are along the way. So it's not really omniscient, but you know what I mean. Besides that, I think that's pretty much what I liked and disliked about this chapter. I was going over my outline for the remainder of the story, and I've already deviated a bunch. Originally, Anaxos was supposed to barely speak English, like almost no English at all. And I just thought, really, that's too much of a challenge for me to write. Sorry if you can hear my cats playing in the background. I thought that was too much of a challenge for me to write, not because I don't like a challenge, but because I don't want to come off as offensive or like one of those like English is the best language type of people, and anyone who doesn't speak it perfectly is somehow at fault for that. I didn't want to come off that way, so instead I made him a character who can speak English, and we learn later on in the story why he can speak English well and why historically it makes sense, because I placed him in the Greek War for Independence because I wanted to give him a set time and place, and it plays to the backstory that he ends up having later on. And it doesn't make him so old that it's like he has no connection to modern day. He has no connection to modern sensibilities, I guess you could call it. He's from the 19th century, so he's not that far removed that he doesn't know how the world works. Sure, there's things like cars and cameras and things like that that he doesn't understand, but he understands what modern boats look like. He understands where Barrett is kind of coming from. He's not so far removed. So I do like where he's set in place to make sense for the story later on. That's what I like and dislike about this chapter. I think I'm going to deviate from my outline more before I get back on track, and that's okay because it's just a rough outline. It's supposed to give me ideas so that I can work off of those, and if it changes chapter by chapter, it changes. Oh well. But that's really the long and short of what I did and didn't like this week. So, as always, if you want to let me know what you liked or disliked about this chapter, you can email me at floorrejects@gmail.com. You can tweet me, floorrejects, on Twitter. You can write me a message in the sky with a skywriting plane. You can send me a carrier pigeon. You can do any of those things. My Etsy store with my drawings should be up pretty soon, I think. I think I'm at a place where I can turn it back on, and if you're interested in that sort of thing, everything will be there again soon. But besides that, I'm not going to hold you up too much this week. I'm going to let you go because I have editing to do, and I still have to edit the last chapter because I forgot to give it to my partner, and he had some major rewrites for it. So I got to do that. But as always, I thank you for listening or watching, however you consume this content. I just ask that if you could give me a 5-star review on your podcasting or listening app of choice. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you could give it a like, that would be great. But otherwise, I'll see you next week for another episode of the Isle of Artemisia with me, your friendly neighborhood author. Bye.